The Salchow is one of the jumps that have visually changed the most over the past 40 years. What I'll talk about here is a bit of the history of that technique over the time period. And I'll tell you, I don't purport to know much about how it was before that because I didn't personally learn it during that time. But what I will talk about here is not necessarily the definitive guide, but it is based on 25 years' experience of having learned jumps from 7 different coaches from different eras of coaching. So, a couple of things before we start, because the terminology is important. When I talk about the landing leg, it is the leg that jumps typically land on. So, if you're righty or a counterclockwise jumper, your landing leg is your right leg. I will be referring to righty jumpers here mostly because that's the majority of the skaters that you'll see. I will also talk about the free leg or the free foot, which is the leg that is not weight bearing on the ice during the motion of the jump. So if you're standing on your left leg, your free leg is the right leg. And the free leg can switch depending on which leg is on the ice. So in fact, your free leg could then become your landing leg. The mechanics of the Salchow are often taught in the same way as the mechanics of the toe loop and the axle. They all have different entries, but the thing that is the same is that the free leg goes up. So it has a step up motion into the rotation in order to generate a significant proportion of that height and that rotational speed that you need. Keep this in mind because it becomes important later when we talk more about technique. The Salchow is generally the first or the second full rotation jump that you learn as a skater. One of the reasons for that is because skaters will learn the waltz jump first, and the waltz jump is basically a half rotation axle. So that body understanding of the step up into the jump from the waltz jump is part of the basis for the Salchow. As I was saying earlier, the toe loop also has the same step up mechanics, so beginners also usually learn the sow and the toe around the same time. The general consensus is that the Salchow and the toe loop are the two easiest jumps, primarily because of that step up. And that step up allows you to generate more rotational momentum. But there are a lot of skaters who will tell you that the Salchow, especially, is the jump that they hate the most. And a lot of that has to do with the feeling of stability of the back inside edge takeoff. Before the early 2000s, the vast majority of skaters entered their Salchows going backwards, then stepping forward into an outside three turn, and then starting their jump going backwards from a back inside edge of their takeoff leg. Once you got into that back inside edge, there are two general techniques at the time. One was more of a scooping motion where the free leg would be straighter and wider before takeoff. And the direction of the free foot is generally neutral or turned outwards. This technique made skaters have the tendency to swing their free leg before they take off, and that can mess with your center of balance. But the consensus was that the swing helps generate your rotational speed, especially as you're first learning how to rotate. The other technique has the legs and especially the thighs closer together, and often you see more of a bent knee in the free leg. The direction of the free foot is generally turned inward. This is more conducive to having the hips be more square, and by that I mean you're not twisting your hips out of alignment with the rest of your body, and so the center of gravity is more stable. What you lose from the rotational momentum of the swinging free leg, you gain from staying down on that back inside edge and getting the edge rip that comes with the action of the jump. Both of these techniques have a certain amount of free leg swing and a certain amount of edge rip, but it's just the amount of each of those that differs depending on what you spend your energy on. So then came the evolution of the Salchow technique in the late 90s or early 2000s. There have already been skaters who had been having this kind of entry in the past. Kurt Browning, Brian Boitano were two of them. And a lot of this has to do with the stability of the body that I was talking about earlier with the swing of the free leg. So instead of stepping into the forward outside three turn that dominated the 80s and the 90s, the entry then started with a back outside three turn, and then you step into a mohawk or a C-step, and then you end up on the back inside edge for the jump. So the back inside edge is still the same. But by getting rid of the forward outside three turn, your free leg naturally swings less, and it stabilizes your center of gravity a lot more before you jump. but it also dampens the amount of rotational speed that you generate with the free leg because it's not wildly swinging anymore. So you really have to get into the back inside edge in order to get the jump and the rotation to work. And even now, beginner skaters don't start with this entry because the back outside three turn is a more advanced turn than the forward outside three turn. And so, one of the reasons for the stability of this entry is that the back outside three turn forces you to square your body and your hips before you step into that mohawk. And it's actually a lot harder for beginner skaters to do. So, this becomes something of a more advanced technique that goes into this jump. So with this entry, you don't see that scooping motion anymore, and you see the second technique of the legs and the thighs closer together a lot more. But the evolution here is also that the free foot is much closer to the ice than it was in previous decades. It's part of the stability and the squaring of the hips, and so you often see skaters with their free foot almost grazing the ice. And here's where weight distribution matters. Having your free foot closer to the ice means that your body isn't leaning as much to compensate for where all your limbs are. And so it allows your body to be as perpendicular as possible to the ice, or even leaning slightly inside the circle of your rotation before the takeoff of your jump. But if you freeze frame or slow-mo a jump, it might actually look like you have weight gliding on both feet, like you're stepping on the ice with both feet. But in fact, all of the weight, or at least the vast majority of the weight of the body, is still on the back inside edge of the takeoff foot, with the free foot blade just kind of there with no weight bearing on it. And a very large proportion of the salchows are like that now. But also in the past 15 years, another technique has become a little bit more popular. And I imagine there'd be other examples, but the most prominent one that I remember was Timothy Gable's Salchow. And a lot of folks weren't in figure skating 25 years ago, but there are tons of debate about whether Tim Gable was taking off with both feet in his Salchows. One of my coaches taught it to me as a cross between the swinging free leg and the closed free leg. You'll remember that I said the free foot in the swinging technique in the 80s and 90s is either neutral or turned out. In this newer technique of that Salchow, the free foot is extremely turned out, and the legs are much farther apart. So it looks kind of like you are back in that wide swing, but you're not really swinging your free leg as much. So the body stability is still there. The upper body is hinged more forward than you'd see in the other technique. The free foot, in this case, can actually have a little bit of weight bearing on it, but when the takeoff happens, it is still the takeoff legs that gets off the ice last, meaning the takeoff leg is still the one bearing the weight as the mechanics of the jump happens. One of the reasons for this technique, again, going back to the similarities between the toe loop and the Salchow, is that it is meant to sort of simulate the actions of the toe loop. The theory is that the more similar your body can feel in a jump, the more consistent your takeoffs can be. So if you feel fairly similar in how you go into a Salchow and how you go into a toe loop, the reps and the consistency will make those two jumps supposedly more consistent. But in terms of body weight transfer, you're still taking off on one foot on the Salchow technique if it's done as it was meant to be done. So what does that mean for the clarification of the poor takeoff of a Salchow being assisted with the free foot on the ice? It could mean that this more recent technique is deemed a poor takeoff. But for me, what I think it more likely is that it means you had to transfer the weight of your free foot because you were unstable before you take off for the jump. This sometimes happens in Salchows in combination, where you don't get a good half loop beforehand, and you end up actually having to restabilize yourself by putting your free foot down and actually putting weight on it before you take off for the actual Salchow itself. We'll see what this actually means in practice in the next season, but what I know it probably doesn't mean is that it probably doesn't mean that all of the Salchows that we have been seeing will be deemed a poor takeoff.